Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started today. My name is Alethea Caridi, and I'm the Assistant Director of Sustainability at the University of New England, and I'm also the Chair of the UNE Planetary Health Council. And I'm going to be hosting the event today, Grow with the Flow, Resilience and Adaptation for a Changing World, in which we have 3 UNE experts who will explore proactive strategies for our personal lives, our communities, and our social ecological systems. Today's event is brought to you through a partnership between the Planetary Health Council and the Center for Excellence in Collaborative Education with support from UNE Communications. So thank you to our partners. Since 2017, UNE has been an institutional member of the International Planetary Health Alliance. It's a Harvard-led consortium of more than 300 universities, non-governmental organizations, and other institutions spanning more than 60 countries. At UNE, our Planetary Health Council is working to strengthen bridges between our robust environmental sciences and health profession programs, and to provide planetary health content through academics, research, and events just like this one. This event will address interprofessional competencies of values and ethics and teamwork, and will be applied toward UNE students' Interprofessional Honors Distinction Badge. So, an overview of today's event. To start the program, I'm going to briefly introduce the speakers, and then the panelists will give their presentations on this important topic. And then we're going to allocate ample time for audience participation and discussion with all of you, as well as some closing remarks from our panelists. So I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists. The first is going to be Dr. Laurie Martel, the UNE Director for Counseling, and she'll be examining today's topic from the individual or interpersonal level. Our second panelist is Dr. Pamela Morgan, a UNE Professor of Environmental Studies, and she will be discussing today's topic from the community and ecological level. And then our third and final panelist today will be Hannah Welsh, the UNE Program Manager for Student Innovation and a recent UNE graduate, and she will be addressing today's topic from the societal and systems level. For our closing discussion with all of you in the audience, Ariana Telzero is our senior student in UNE's Marine Affairs program, and she's going to serve as the discussion moderator. So many thanks to everyone for joining us. We have a truly remarkable group of experts gathered today, and I'm so excited to hear everything that they're going to share with us. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Laurie Martel, our first panelist, to share her expertise in mental health and considerations for the individual and interpersonal level. And just everybody save your questions until the very end. So thank you very much.
Clicker. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for attending today. We'll get there. All right. So when we look at this topic and really look at how is it that we can stay healthy and well given everything we have faced in the last couple of years, what this question is really getting to is how we can develop this resiliency and adaptation. One of the ways is to develop our internal strengths, which help us focus and motivate us to stay healthy and move forward. What do I mean by internal strengths? Those are our inner direction, our humor, our optimism, our flexibility, all traits that can assist us in lowering our negativity and increasing our resiliency and build our strengths moving forward. When we look at this topic, every day we are faced with difficulties and challenges, even tragedies, especially in the last 2 years. And it is our capabilities and abilities that will allow us to persevere when we're faced with adversity. When we look at problem-focused coping in a constant changing world and environment, the more we are able to focus on what's transpiring, the more we are able to broaden our cognitive skills, how we are able to think with the problems that may face us. When we're able to focus on that, it actually increases our resilience. We are able to be more self-confident in what we're doing and therefore enjoy better and better health. Can we really enjoy the work environment and in our personal and professional lives? If we can do that, we do create pleasure within our systems, both personally and professionally. And when we do that, when we feel enjoyment in what we're doing, it decreases our anxiety and feelings of negativity, our fear and our anger and our helplessness, again, increasing our cognitive ability of how we think about things and how we're able to move forward. So I'd like to look at these 3 little bullets at the bottom: how we connect with others, how we can build a routine, and what does that do for us when we talk about resiliency and adaptability, and then how we change our mindset moving forward. When we look at connection, whoops, let me put those up there for you. We all need human connection. It's how we survive. It's the way we move through our life, through difficult times. If we are unable to make significant connections, both personally and professionally, it decreases our ability to get through the experiences, the situations, the struggles, and the tragedies. We all need that, again, human connection. And yes, we need outside connection as well, but it's the internal stuff that can foster those safe relationships. When we build those safe relationships and develop our commitment to our health and wellness and safety, it can help us move forward. Can we discuss with the people that are in our circles what it is we need before we really need it? Let me explain that. So sometimes, especially when we're in a relationship, we think the people within our lives already know what it is we need. And we think they're mind readers, our partners, our significant others, our family members. But if they knew before we knew, in other words, if you've had a really bad day, can you say to somebody, listen, if I come home, I've got this face on, and maybe I have a list up on the refrigerator that says, I'm going for a run, you're making supper, I'm walking the dog, then people know what it is we need. When that communication happens, that builds that connection, that builds that relationship we need to move forward in our lives. Routine. You know, when I talk to people about, do you have a routine? Do you build a routine? They all look at me like I have a third eye. Well, of course I have that planner. Of course I know where I'm going when I'm doing it. But when we're able to build a routine, creating efficiency also helps reduce procrastination. When we create structure within our lives in building that routine, that assists in reducing our stress load. Those healthy habits we talk about all the time, to reach our goals, to keep us motivated. There's actually a rationale behind why that happens. Every time we feel good about something we do, we cross something off our list, we actually release dopamine, which is our feel-good receptor. If we can do that, that gives us the motivation to keep moving forward, thereby increasing our cognitive abilities and increasing our resiliency. The power of our mindset. You know, our mindset really is more than just our thoughts and beliefs. It's our values. It's how it affects how we behave, how we cope, how we move forward, how we view those struggles and those catastrophes. Do we look at those struggles and challenges as horrendous, or do we look at them as an option, an opportunity to look at it from a different viewpoint, to be able to move forward what might be keeping us stuck? Are these opportunities or doors that might open for us? You know, our brain is continually evolving, continually forming new roadmaps, creating this neuroplasticity to help us to move forward. Can we acquire knowledge about the professions we're in or the professions we're going into? What is it that we need to know about the profession or our life that will keep us healthy and well? That power of the mindset, that game changer. When we look at the game changer, what is it about our lives that will allow us to cultivate positive emotions moving forward on a regular basis to help build that resiliency and help us live longer? I think the reason this quote sticks with me, the mind is everything what you think you can become, is it's easy to be cynical, especially the last few years that we've all had to endure through this pandemic. But if we can turn that cynicism, if you will, increase our competency in the way we communicate with others and the way we communicate our emotions. There's an old saying that says, if you can name it, you can tame it. You know, are we really angry with something, or are we frustrated or irritable? And can we convey that in the relationships in which we're in? Can we look at what the meaning and purpose is within our lives and set some goals for ourselves? And when we set goals, those goals need to be believable, they need to be measurable, and they need to be obtainable. I think if we could ask ourselves what brings us joy, and not many of us take a step back and really look at that phraseology, if you will, and look at what brings us meaning. If we can look at what brings us joy, can we start to develop a kinder attitude towards ourselves? Can we crystallize sort of that gentle inner voice? I think the phrase nowadays is, can we give ourselves some grace? Can we take that step back and give ourselves permission not to be perfect? Give ourselves permission to take that time to breathe, observe other things around us that we might not be observing, and be able to move forward. Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand it over to Pam.
Okay. So I'd like to actually, before I start going through my slides, just have you all take a minute to think of a place that you like to spend time that makes you happy. So take a minute, just close your eyes. Where is that place that makes you happy? So many of you may be thinking about a place in nature. And connecting with nature really can make us happy. So I'd like to talk to you first a little bit about the value of connecting with nature for all of us. In fact, there's a great book that I highly recommend if you haven't read it. It's called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams. She traveled all over the world to gather research that's being done that shows all the different ways that connecting with nature is good for people. And some of these you're probably already familiar with. So as you probably know, spending time in nature definitely reduces our stress and anxiety. Spending time in nature can make us more creative. Spending time in nature has even been shown to improve our cognitive functioning. So if you're about to take a big test, get outside and go for a little walk before you take that test. Scientists have actually seen that as little as 15 minutes spent in the woods each day reduces test subjects' levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And studies consistently report reduced blood pressure and heart rate after spending time in nature. And I don't know if you knew this, but trees, they actually release chemicals into the atmosphere, aerosols, that when you breathe them in, they relax you, and they also are antibacterial. So scientists are finding out a lot of really cool stuff about why it is that spending time in nature is so good for us. So again, I really highly recommend that you read the book. So now, imagine living in a world where we incorporate nature into our communities, where as we build or develop or grow our communities, we really think about how can we incorporate nature into almost everything. Nature brings us so many benefits, and many of you students may have heard the term ecosystem services. So nature cleans our water and our air, for example. There's lots of things that nature brings to us. This idea of working with nature as we build our communities is known as green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is a term that's been around for about 10 years, and it started with planners thinking about how can we find green spaces in our communities and connect them to the places where people live. In more recent years, green infrastructure has become more of an umbrella term for even smaller nature-based solutions. And if you look at this diagram, which is from an EU report, it shows some of the different ways that we might think about working with nature. Everything from, as you can see on here, green roofs, which we have right here on campus, to in the bottom right-hand corner, you see a green overpass. So conservationists are working at figuring out how to get animals across highways, either over or under, using nature. Lots of cool nature-based solutions. And we actually have some of these right here on campus. I just wanted to point out. You may or may not have noticed we have a bunch of bird and bat boxes around campus, and those were installed at least 5 years ago now. The idea being that the birds who inhabit these boxes are super good at eating mosquitoes. They eat hundreds and thousands of mosquitoes. So why not have these boxes and give places for the birds to live rather than spraying chemicals on our campus, right? Another nature-based solution is our rain garden, which is grown in quite a bit since this picture was taken, but it's near the Martel parking lot. This is a way to deal with storm water runoff. So when it rains heavily, there's a lot of impervious surfaces on our campus, parking lots, all that water has to go somewhere. We can capture that water in a rain garden, and the rain garden will help to clean the water for us. So we're already doing this right here on our campus. So now I'm going to talk to you about a new project that we're working on, my students and I, and it has to do with helping us to be more resilient against impacts from climate change, because this is a big one that's coming at us and is already, as you know, is already starting. The thing about nature and working with nature too is nature itself is very resilient. Ecosystems, for years, scientists have seen, can bounce back after disturbance. So if this is the case, why wouldn't we work with nature to try to be more resilient in our communities? So here at UNE, we're right on the coast, which is super lucky for us, but we also have some challenges ahead of us. We have these marshes. You can see these little marshes lining the edge of our campus here. And as we look down on this piece of the marsh right near our sewage treatment plant, you can see these marshes are super good at absorbing wave energy. So when waves come up towards the shore, marshes have been found to absorb at least 2/3 of the energy of waves in just 7 meters. So they're great at absorbing that wave energy, which prevents the waves then from attacking our sewage treatment plant, for example. However, if you look at some of the marshes we have along campus right now, you can see from this photo that the edges of our marshes are actually eroding themselves. I don't know if this little pointer will work. There it is. You can see chunks are actually falling off of some of our marshes. Here's some students in my Gulf of Maine Field Studies class looking at this up close, and you can see this is really happening right now as we speak. So what the students are doing in class is they're trying to think about how can we come up with a nature-based solution to this. And the nature-based solution that they're working on is known as living shorelines. Living shorelines can be many different things. They're being developed all around the world, south of us quite more than they are in Maine. But the type of living shoreline that we are looking at has to do with marshes. So a living shoreline is simply working with natural ingredients to try to protect your coast from erosion. Here's a picture on the left. You can see an area that has been pretty severely eroded. On the right, a living shoreline was put into place, and now that shoreline is protected. And just one more example, this is from Virginia. You can see that fiber logs were placed along the edge. They filled in behind those fiber logs, planted marsh grass, and just a couple of years later, this is what we have. These systems are awesome too because marshes themselves are very resilient. They actually have this incredible ability to keep up with sea level rise. So as sea level rises, the marshes themselves can grow. So it's a great way to protect our adjacent upland. Also, it provides habitat for living things, which I think is an added benefit for these projects. So I guess I'd like to just close with having you think about the benefits of doing a project like this on our campus. The third one I didn't even mention is students have the opportunity then to see this project through, to help monitor the projects into the future to make sure they're working well. But in the big picture, I think I'd like us to just consider, as we think about resilience and adaptation to everything that's kind of being thrown at us, can we work with nature to come up with solutions that benefit us and benefit the natural world? So next, I'm going to hand it off to Hannah.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah, and I wanted to start off today with one of my favorite quotes. It says, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Now, being able to think differently is an essential and fundamental concept when we're talking about things like being able to adapt and be resilient. And it's also essential when we want to look at innovative and creative solutions to the problems that we face today. So I want to talk a little bit about the word innovation, what it means and what it isn't. When I say that word, you might have an image start to come to mind. A lot of people tend to think about this genius guy in his garage in Silicon Valley, coming up with his next big business idea, or tinkering, trying to come up with the next new technology that's going to take over our lives. But in reality, it's a much more collaborative process than this. It typically requires a team with a huge range of different skill sets, some of which are resiliency and adaptability, but also empathy and creative problem solving and communication. So I want to ask you guys a question. Where would you start if you wanted to redesign the American education system? Should be pretty easy. No? No one? It's a pretty wicked problem, right? That's not easy to answer, and I'm not just saying wicked because I'm becoming a true Mainer. Wicked problems are actually a thing, and they are defined as problems that have many interdependent factors, making them seem impossible to solve. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you're an ex-engineer who just quit his job to travel around the world. You settle down in Peru, and you decide to open a school. One day, a businessman reaches out to you, and he wants to take you out to coffee. Turns out this guy's actually a billionaire, and he wants to invest in you to open 100 more schools. But while you're at it, he doesn't want you to just open the buildings. He wants you to completely reimagine the K-12 learning experience. I'm talking curriculum, teacher training, the physical buildings, the whole 9 yards. You need to be providing international quality education at an affordable price in a developing country that, by the way, was ranked next to last in the world for education. Another pretty wicked problem, I'd say. Luckily, there is a method that's known for its ability to tackle wicked problems, and it's called design thinking. But instead of taking today to explain the process of design thinking to you, what I really want to highlight are the principles and mindsets that design thinking is founded on that make it so successful at tackling these types of problems. With design thinking, you have to be relentlessly curious and question everything to even approach a problem before you even start to come up with solutions. So this Peru example that I gave you, this isn't a theoretical. This is something that actually happened. So this ex-engineer and businessman turned to design thinking consultants to help them take this on. The consultants helped them radically collaborate. They brought them mechanical engineers, designers, world-class education specialists, and they all worked together on this problem. They help them have what we call a bias towards action and really embracing experimentation. So in the beginning, these guys were quite literally creating cardboard replicas of their ideas and putting them in front of students and teachers and parents and getting their feedback, taking that, revamping their little cardboard prototypes and doing this again and again and again until they got it right. Eventually something called Innova Schools was born from this project, and in less than 6 years, they were serving over 50,000 students across the country. Their national reading averages increased from 61% to 88%. And in math, that went from 25 to 61%. So you can see what started as a pretty wicked problem turned into a solution that was just nominated by the World Economic Forum as one of the 16 schools defining the future of education. It is now the largest private school network in Peru, and it started expanding into other countries as well, like Mexico and Colombia. So you might be wondering, what does this have to do with our environment when we talk about wicked problems like climate change? Well, one of the things that I love about innovation is that it's not always about reinventing the wheel or the newest cutting-edge technology. A lot of times it's just about being able to unlearn the way that we used to do things and opening ourselves up to thinking differently. So right now, our UN leaders are working on delivering our 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So we have our 17 SDGs. If you're not familiar with them, I'll read just a few off. They're things like eradicating poverty and hunger, providing quality education to everyone and gender equality, clean and sanitized water and air. This is a pretty ambitious agenda, especially put into the context of the timeline that we want to accomplish all of this within the next 7 to 8 years. At the rate that we're going, this seems practically impossible. So it's not too surprising to see that our UN leaders have actually started reaching out to some consultants who have recommended design thinking to attack this agenda. Our traditional approaches right now tend to focus on individual sectors and patchwork policymaking, and we've seen that this isn't creating change fast enough to keep up with this agenda. So what would likely happen if we use an innovative method and human-centered method like design thinking is we'd likely see more local, collaborative, and participatory initiatives founded in the local context, which is really important because we know there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to any one of these problems. So instead of waiting for our national leaders and politicians and scientists to all come up with a solution, agree on it, and then implement it from the top down and wait to see what the problems that one causes are, what we would likely see instead are communities getting together, trying new things, prototyping, coming up with ideas, seeing what works for them. And so now we're having creative and unique solutions bubbling up all over the world on the community level. So because you're here today, I think that you're kind of like me. You really want to see change, and you want to help be part of the change. But you're probably scared because you don't think it's happening fast enough. Well, luckily, you don't have to wait, because you don't have to be a politician or a genius or a design thinking consultant to be an innovator. That's really why I love innovation, because anyone can be an innovator. It's relevant to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you are going to be a nurse, or you're an aspiring marine scientist, or you want to start your own business. You can learn to be an innovator. It's just a set of skills and mindsets that are teachable and practicable just like anything else. So you can learn to be an innovator, whatever that means to you, and create the change that you want to see in the world. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Hannah, and to all of our panelists today for sharing an impressive breadth and depth of your knowledge and for expertise in super urgent issues. So now we're going to encourage questions and comments from all of you in the audience. For our viewers that are on Facebook Live, please type your questions and stories or reactions into the chat function. And we have viewers on the Portland campus as well. Please feel free to direct your questions and comments to Chris Hall with the Center for Excellence in Collaborative Education, and she'll pass them along to us here. So we want to hear your perspectives on these urgent issues as current and future leaders in the health professions and environmental sciences, and as engaged citizens of our community and world. So our student discussion moderator, Ariana Telzerell, will facilitate the conversation. For those of you here in attendance in Biddeford, Ariana will come around with a microphone for your question.
I have a question for Pam. Really intrigued by the amount of work that's already taking place on campus, and I love the idea about what we could be doing next. And when you talk about the Shoreline, the Living Shoreline project, I'm just wondering about regulations, and once you're on a water line, it's not just campus property at that point. I'm sure it's much more complicated, but I don't have a full grasp of who else would need to endorse a project like that to move forward.
So, yeah, that's a pretty specific question, and I'll give you a quick answer, and that is that you do need to get permits to do this kind of work, and UNE often works with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. We would also need permits from the Army Corps of Engineers. So yes, that's definitely part of it. The students in the class have already reached out to some of these consultants and professionals and are kind of gathering information about that. So that is something we will be tackling probably a little further down the line. We haven't come up with the design yet. We have an expert actually on campus tomorrow who's going to walk the site with us, which is kind of exciting. We're gathering as much information from as many stakeholders as we can. And I think you were even interviewed a couple of years ago about the project. So yes, permitting is definitely something that will need to happen. I was at a conference yesterday, and I'll be honest that the laws are right now behind the innovation, let's say. People are innovating on solving some of these problems a lot faster than our legal system is allowing. So we're also trying to work with state of Maine lawmakers to change some of the regulations to make this type of project easier. But it's a challenge. That is definitely a challenge, yeah.
Pam, on that. You mentioned the living shorelines would be replacing what's happening right now with the shorelines are sort of caving in, but you also started the talk with that the waves come up and then that's a natural berm, or it stops the waves from coming into the living shorelines. Do the same effect? Or how would they be impacted by the waves coming in?
The living shorelines?
Yes.
Yes. So the design of a living shoreline has to match the site. So you might have noticed that first picture I showed you had a rock sill along the edge, and then the marsh was behind that. So often we need to, for living shorelines, we need to put something. Sometimes there's oyster reefs that are put beyond to help reduce the energy of the wave. So then as the wave reaches the marsh, you know, the energy's already been reduced. And we can work with scientists to kind of figure out exactly where our most vulnerable areas are. In fact, this semester, our class is working with Charles Tilburg to look at where the most vulnerable parts of those marshes are by putting drifters, and we're actually going to be throwing oranges into the river and watching where they come on shore and how much wave energy there is. So yeah, you're right. The marsh itself can keep up with sea level rise, but with the pace of what's happening now, we often need to help that. And so those extra features can assist with that.
Thank you. This question is for Hannah. With your work in the Makerspace and innovation on campus, is there a pathway for some of the challenges that we see locally to make their way into the Makerspace and innovation for our students to work on those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we pretty recently started a program called the Student Innovation Fellows Team. So last year was the first year we ran that program, and so we had select students that were working on various different projects across campus, all kind of founded in the context of something that they were really passionate about. This year the program looks a little bit different, but the design of it is to train these students, you know, closer to when they get here as freshmen and sophomores with the skills that we talked about and the mindsets. And then the thought process there is once they've gone through a year of that, they're more capable of being able to go out and find problems that they're really passionate about and then bring those back to us so that we can take their next couple of years to go through and ideate and start practicing how to solve real world problems in that sense. So yeah, thanks.
So
Excuse me. So I think this question is for all three. I mean, one of the things that I teach a lot of classes where there's climate change, and one of the things that I have to deal with the students is getting them over this dread or this fear or this feeling that this problem is unsolvable, that there's nothing that they can do about it, or that the individual things that they can do are too small and they won't make a difference. And, you know, Pam, you just talked about something that will make a concrete difference here, and I'm wondering, you know, how should I be approaching my students? I want them to understand the problem, but I also don't want them to give up in despair.
I'll start. And I loved the whole curiosity and creativity that we need to move forward. I think some of that is how we dispel the myths about what people say on how to move forward in that resiliency and adaptation and adaptability. So many times you hear, you know, just suck it up, if you will, get over it, and just move forward. And resilient people, you know, they're strong and they don't need. No. And so dispelling that myth is being able to reach out to people to be able to say, we can create change. We can use our creativity and curiosity to see what it is that we need. Strong people don't hide their emotions. They ask for help to see what they can do to move forward with their emotions. So I know it's hard to get students to reach out sometimes and to take a step back and say, I am vulnerable. I need to reach out for some assistance. And it is very difficult. But yeah, being able to see who they have for partners, who they have for support systems, to let them know that making it, if you will, is certainly a possibility for sure.
Yeah, so just to add to that, in the classroom, I think even if you're teaching you know, an oceanography class or a climate change class based on the science of climate change. You know, I teach a class called Conservation, and in that class we talk a lot about the problem of climate change, and we do talk about solutions too, but what I've found helpful is to give students some space in class to actually talk about their feelings. I think we kind of just forge ahead and assume that everyone's on board, and I think no matter what type of class it is, just giving a little space for students, and they can talk out loud, they could do a free write. I've used clickers and had sort of questions and word clouds to let students have an opportunity to just get their feelings out there. And so I found that to be helpful. And then also to talk about solutions, because I believe we have the answers. It's just how do we implement them, right? So trying to highlight these small case studies where there's power in all of these small things that are happening all over the world. And I really believe that the more we can focus on these success stories, it gives us that hope that we need to not just despair.
It wasn't that long ago that I was one of the students in your type of class that it was just really hard to hear about all these awful things going on in the world and feeling like they're never going to get any better. What I would say to that is being able to look in the world for examples of people doing things differently than the same type of thing that we hear every day. You have to reduce, you have to reuse, you have to recycle, you have to be kind to the environment. Hearing that day after day can sometimes start to feel like, well, if it's not working at this point, it's never going to work. So being able to look to our partners around the world and see all the things that they're trying, even if they haven't actually worked yet. I think as a student, just knowing that there's people out there who care and that they're using all of their creativity and everything that they have to try new things can create a lot of hope for students.
So I just wanted to, first of all, thank all three of you. This is phenomenal. And thank you for Lethea for help putting this on. I just absolutely love it. It's interesting. It dovetails with an op-ed that Jen DeBrow and I just had published this morning in Inside Higher Ed. And the timing couldn't have been better because you are making exactly the points that we made in that piece this morning. So I guess my question is, I'm trying to think of how to articulate this best. So this reminds me, maybe a year or two ago, I'm not sure when, my COVID has done a number with my sense of time. I can't, I have sort of, was it pre-COVID or during COVID? We did a President's Forum event on the question of, is it ethical to profit from climate change? So the basic idea was climate change is opening up new possibilities, right? You have everything from farming for the first time in Greenland to the opening up of the Northwest and the Northeast passages, and so you have these new shipping channels and that sort of thing. But if you take advantage of those things, then you're now incentivized to allow to climate change to continue, and you're certainly de-incentivized from actually doing things to solve climate change. So it poses a really, but on the other hand, if you throw your hands up and say, no, we're not going to do that, well then you forego opportunities to lift people out of poverty, for example, and you're also sort of telling indigenous people in the Arctic that they should not be allowed to have economic development that they otherwise would have access to, which can be pretty patronizing. So anyway, the point is, it's an interesting dilemma. And what reminded me of that in listening to you all is, it seems like there's a tension, a little bit of a tension between trying to solve the underlying problem versus adaptation, learning to adapt to the problem. So if you talk about climate change, for example, some efforts can actually try to solve climate change. Others can say, okay, climate change is inevitable, which of course to some degree it is, we know that, and we're going to now work on mitigating against it, right? And I think that's same thing at the psychological sort of personal level, same thing. Do you focus your energies on solving some underlying, if you have a relationship issue, for example, learning to adapt to the problems in the relationship, or changing the relationship, or maybe getting out of the relationship, right? So, and same thing. So at all three of the levels of analysis that you've talked about, there's this underlying tension. I don't think it's either or, right? You can do both, but figuring out sort of that decision point of how much energy you put on fostering resilience versus how much you put on solving the underlying problem to begin with, it seems like is a critical, I don't have the answer, so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
The first thing that came to mind for me is coming back to what the need is. And that's something that design thinking talks a lot about, is what's the human need associated with this issue. So a lot of times people will think that, solving climate change isn't a human issue, it's an environmental issue. But we need this planet to survive. Human existence is a need, and not just what we need to exist, but also what we need to thrive. So I think that kind of comes back to tackling, how do we solve a problem and how do we learn to adapt and be resilient all in one? That is a need. We have to be able to create a way forward that is able to encompass all aspects of that solution. It's not an exact answer, but yeah.
And you say need, I say meaning and purpose. What is the meaning in an individual's life, psychologically speaking, to move forward in adaptability and be able to thrive in a healthy way? And so when we look at that quote unquote meaning and purpose, what are the strategies that we can introduce to a human being to be able to make it viable for them to stay healthy and well? So, and that's different, obviously, for everyone to be able to move forward with their lives. So maybe it's the contextual factor that we're speaking to when we look at how to solve that issue, if you will, of adaptability. But yeah.
It's really interesting that you raise this, because I'm serving on my town's local climate action task force now. A lot of towns in the state of Maine and around the country are starting to try to work on coming up with climate action plans. What are we going to do to deal with climate change in our community? And during one of our recent meetings, one of the members of the committee actually raised this very question. He said, and I'll tell you, he was very blunt about it. He said, look, I have salt water coming onto my property now. The tide is higher than it ever was. I don't want to waste my time reducing my carbon emissions. I think what we really need to make sure we can do is figure out how to adapt to these rising sea levels. This is urgent. It's happening right in my backyard. So you can imagine we had quite a long discussion, because it is, like you said, do you get at the root of the problem, which is we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and get more greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, or do we adapt? And just as you said, it's not an either or. We have to do both. And if we don't do the former, if we don't get those emissions lowered, the sea is going to continue to rise, and it's going to continue to rise faster and faster and more. So, you know, even though it may seem like our little towns reducing our emissions is just a drop in the bucket, towns everywhere have to do this if we're going to have the effects that we need to. And I personally think it's our moral responsibility to do this, because we live in a place where we are fortunate enough to have resources to adapt and to do some of these things. And there are a lot of places on the earth that are already underwater. So I think we have to do both, and you kind of said that in your question.
Regardless of whether we're thinking about individual resilience, community resilience, or applying strategies that are really effective in helping us do that, I think my big question is, how do we start? Whether as individuals or communities, we recognize that there are wicked problems out there. Where do we begin to start to address the problems that we're seeing, to adapt or to solve them?
I think a piece of that is what's happening right now with what we're doing here today. And I still consider myself fairly new to UNE, but what I have seen here thus far in this community, this educational community, is the willingness to have a conversation, to sit down and have a conversation about what's working, what's not working, that one person to bring forward an idea to initiate that change, for me, is huge. And so if we don't talk about it, then how can we solve it, right? So I think a piece of that is through these conversations, through these programs such as this, to be able to open up the door, so to speak.
Yeah, I'll just totally agree with that. I think especially with respect to climate change, as individuals, the best thing you can do, the most important thing, is just talk about it. Talk about it with your friends, talk about it with your families, just start talking about it, communicate about it. You don't even have to call it climate change if you don't want. Whatever your concerns are, just talk about them. There's a wonderful author named Katharine Hayhoe. If you don't know her, you should look her up, because she's very uplifting. She's a PhD in climate change physics or something, and she's very, quite the brain, but she's really good at communicating, and she talks about this a lot. That what we really need to do to begin with is just start the conversation, just start talking about it, and you will connect with people, and you will hear about projects or activities that you can do to just kind of get yourself going, and slowly taking action, even on a small scale, is going to really empower you. So talk about it, and then figure out just a small something that you can participate in, and it will definitely get you going. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, really similar to what Pam said. I differ a little bit. I think conversations are extremely important to have, but I think a lot of times we can get caught up in a lot of conversations because we could talk about it until we're all dead. So I think for me, what is really important is having that kind of bias towards action and just trying stuff, physically doing things to see if it works. And most likely the first time you do something, it's not going to work. You're not going to do it perfectly, and it's not going to go exactly how you think it's going to, but at least you started somewhere. And now you have learned from your first try, and you get to do it again and again until you get it right or you find a better way of doing it.
All right, thank you very much for your, to all the audience members for great questions, and also to our very talented panel, and also to Ari for passing the mic and facilitating this discussion. I just wanted to mention that I feel like this topic is being echoed in different parts of my life, and so I really appreciate all of the speakers' comments. The words joy and nature in relation to stress have been sort of filtering around, and in different parts of my life. So I appreciate the sort of affirmation and reminding. So for the sake of time, I'm now going to invite our panelists to share their closing thoughts. So if you wouldn't mind, panelists, in a few words, please share a hopeful vision. I think we were starting to land on that, but a hopeful vision for the future in these strange times. What examples of progress and success give you reason to have hope? And if we can come together across professions and look at this from an interprofessional perspective to address these challenges, what do you envision our future could look like? So if you wouldn't mind sharing in the same order that you presented, so Laurie and then Pam and then Hannah, that would be fantastic.
I think for me, it is, when I look at the word hope and being hopeful, I mean, we all have that within ourselves, regardless of what profession or what we subscribe to, knowing that there's something to look forward to give us that encouragement to be able to move forward is absolutely huge. From that psychological perspective, I'll go back to a little bit about what I said when I finished, is we're all so busy in our lives, going in so many different directions at one time. It is hard sometimes to take that step back and say, what is it that I need to move forward? And recognizing what our assets are, what our contributions are, and acknowledging that and giving ourselves credit for that and being kind to ourselves to move forward, to instill that hope within us.
So we knew we were going to get this question. So I actually brought a quote that I'd like to share with you guys. Someone that you probably all know and love, Jane Goodall. She writes a lot about hope and talks a lot about hope. And I have to be honest, I used to really disagree with this idea of hope. What are we going to do? Sit around and hope that things are going to get better? That used to tick me off, like, no, we can't just hope. We have to do something. Well, Jane Goodall thinks about hope in a different way. Hope is tied to action, right? So the quote from her is, I do have reasons for hope. Our clever brains, the resilience of nature, the indomitable human spirit, and above all, the commitment of young people when they're empowered to take action. All those things give us hope, and hope is what leads to doing something and taking action. And so looking at the future, I sometimes don't like when people say, oh, the younger generation, they're so great, they're going to take care of all our problems because we made the mess and we need to be part of those solutions, right? It's not just on you guys. But I do believe that we do have a lot of hope in young people because I see how engaged they are and how much they really want to work on this and how much they want to work with us. So that gives me a lot of hope.
I think one of the things that gives me hope is this school, actually, and its willingness to start to embrace change. This year, for the first time, UNE is having a student team actually run a design thinking project right on campus for the first time, and they're going to be kind of reimagining different spaces around campus and the way that students interact with them and use them. And I think that's just a really great example of UNE's willingness to learn how to teach our students all of these really tough skills that you can't always teach in the classroom. We're really giving them the opportunity to get involved and practice what this looks like in the real world and involve the entire community at the same time. So that's what gives me hope.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much to all of you for your thoughts and for your inspiration and your expertise. We're so really grateful that you just took the time today to be here and share with us. For audience members, if you have any more questions or thoughts, you should definitely feel free to contact our panelists directly. They'd love to hear from you. Their contact information is up on the slide. And audience, before you leave today, please fill out this brief attendance survey shown on the screen. You can use your phone and the QR code. Michelle's posting it on the Facebook chat for those of us on our virtual audience. And also, just as a reminder to students, that today's event addresses interprofessional competencies of teamwork and values and ethics, and can be applied toward UNE's Interprofessional Honors Distinction Badge. So many thanks again to our wonderful partners, the UNE Planetary Health Council and the Center for Excellence in Collaborative Education and UNE Communications. Without you, all these events would not be possible, so thank you. And many thanks to all of the audience members for joining us today. It's only when we come together across our disciplines to learn about and discuss these important issues that we have the greatest potential for impact. So, thank you.